Okay, it's just turned midday here. Welcome, everybody. My name is Gethin Ellis, and welcome to this webinar on cloud computing. It's called Mysteries, Vampires and Vultures, and the intention of this webinar is to give you a bit more information on how cloud can be good or beneficial to your business, and also hopefully to highlight you some of the gotchas that can catch you out, and then thus potentially cost you financially if you don't consider them properly with your cloud deployments. So I'll start by giving you a little bit of information about me. I've been working with Microsoft's data platform, both on premises and latterly through Microsoft Azure and a little bit with AWS for the last 20 years or so. In that time, I've had a variety of jobs, from report writer, web developer, DBA, architect, consultant, and so on. For the last 12 years, I've been running a small consulting and training business called gethinellis.com. And lately we've partnered with our good friends at Widen to offer cost-effective end-to-end solutions in a few different areas, but it might be data platform migration, upgrades, migrations on premises, migrations to Azure, and migrations to AWS. It might be data platform architecture, high availability disaster recovery, again on premises or in a cloud solution. It could be SQL Server health checks and performance tune-ups. And we offer training on Microsoft's data platform and Azure too, offering the full Microsoft curriculum of courses. Now, just a bit of a shout out here to our sponsors, Interpeople. I'd like to thank them for helping promote the event. We use social media quite extensively. We're very active on Twitter and LinkedIn, so feel free to look me up and connect with me on those platforms. I do follow back. And if you've got any questions on what we discuss in this session today, when you go away after, just note my email address there. You are more than welcome to drop me an email. But there is a Q&A pod if you have questions as we make our way through that you'd like answers to. So what we're going to cover in this session, we're going to quite a few things. We're going to talk briefly about what cloud computing is and what options you have available to you, what those options can mean to your business, what are the risks associated with migrating to the cloud, or which risks are you mitigating by moving to the cloud and which risks are not. What's going to be your responsibility after you've moved to the cloud? Is the cloud a solution for all your IT worries? Will you still need an IT team once you've migrated all your infrastructure to the cloud? Okay, now some of these might seem a little bit silly. Will you still need an IT team after you move to the cloud? You probably will, although you might have been sold ideas to the contrary. And then we'll just give you a few little tips on how to get the best out of the cloud for you. So this is just setting the scene. Cloud is the delivery of IT and applications over the internet. And what we've got in the list here are the sort of things that can be provided by the cloud. So we've got software and applications, we've got servers, storage databases, analytics, virtual networks, and the like. Okay, so what is cloud computing? It's just the delivery of IT and applications over the internet. Then I want to be a little bit more specific around some of the generally accepted models of cloud computing. Okay, there's 3 listed there, or 4 actually. We've got public cloud, which is owned by a cloud service provider such as Microsoft or Amazon or Google. You might have a private cloud where you host the cloud services on your own infrastructure and in your own buildings and in your own data center. Or there is the hybrid cloud, which is a combination of perhaps a public cloud offering and maybe a private cloud, or more likely some on-premises technology that will work with public cloud offerings to allow you to run your applications in the most appropriate location, giving you that big degree of flexibility. So if you've got choices to make around compliance and regulation, you can use the hybrid cloud to control where your data sits and lives. Co-location is on there as well. Not strictly cloud technology. It doesn't offer the flexibility of a full cloud offering, but it means you've got a space in somebody else's data center where you put some kit. It's not strictly cloud, but you haven't got the investment necessarily on premises of a data center. So probably a good opportunity for some audience participation. So using the chat pod, just type some comments in. I've got a few questions here. Are you currently delivering any solutions through one of these cloud models here? I'm particularly interested in public cloud. Are you planning to deliver any cloud solutions over the next year to 2 years? Or are you staying on premises or co-located? I'm just going to give you a few seconds to answer. I'm just interested to see in the responses we get there. Nico, yes, doing backup to blogs, next 3 years fully cloud. Thank you, Nico. That's really useful. I suspect engage in the dynamics in Azure project and migrate to the cloud is Mark. Cool. Okay. Can't see anybody else typing there, but thanks for your response, guys. That's really useful and really good to know. So what we're going to talk about mainly for the rest of this webinar is public cloud offerings. And what we've got on the screen here is a way of describing the cloud service models that a public cloud are likely to offer you in sort of generic terms. Okay, so if you go in public cloud, you're either going to be using infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service. And there are a few other variants on this, but these are the main players. If you're using infrastructure as a service, you're running your virtual machines in your cloud provider. It's pay-as-you-go, instant infrastructure. You're renting the servers, you're renting the virtual machines, you're renting the storage networks and operating system from your cloud provider. You can spin up this infrastructure really quickly. Applications can be made accessible quickly. They can be deprovisioned whenever they need to be as well. So you can turn them on and turn them off as you need them. It's a consumption-based model, so you pay for what you use. So an example I always quote here would be, say, a web server running on a virtual machine in Azure, offering up web pages to your users. Then we've got platform as a service. And in terms of what you're responsible for with each of these service models, we'll talk about a little bit later on. But as a platform as a service, and I've just got I thought a WhatsApp from a colleague then saying you couldn't hear me or something, but it turned out it was something else. Apologies. So platform as a service, it gives you an environment for building, testing, and deploying software applications and allowing you to do that really quickly without you and your team needing to focus on the underlying infrastructure. So an example I always quote as platform as a service would be Azure SQL database. Okay, you don't need to worry about installing servers, installing operating systems, installing SQL Server itself. You don't need to worry about patching it. You do need to worry about the data that's in there now and the applications that work on it. So there's still some work for you to do on platform as a service. Then we've got software as a service. So it's a centrally hosted and managed software for end users. End users connect to and then use these cloud-based apps over the internet. And examples here include things like Office 365, email and calendars, and the like. Now, what we've got on this slide is basically depicting some of the functionality you can get out of the box or is easily configurable. Now, these are important as they can be primary reasons for driving decisions to move to the cloud, particularly around flexibility, agility, and high availability. But also, most cloud service providers these days give you robust service level agreements around uptime. If you're based here, say in the UK, and you want to offer applications up to your customers, which might not be based here in the UK, perhaps they're over in Europe, you can locate your application next to your customer, reducing that latency. They've got global reach. They're pretty secure these days, and they have some guarantees around performance too. Oh, I've just had a message there from Imran. Thank you for replying. Public cloud strategy, fully cloud by 2024. That's really interesting. So lots of change on the way for people on the webinar. So just based off what we've said there, and I'm guessing this is going to work quite well for people. So again, another little bit of audience interaction. I'm just going to pop a poll on the screen for you. It's just asking you what you think certain types of software or services are, whether they're private cloud, public cloud, infrastructure as a service, software as a service. So I'm just going to check that and launch that, and hopefully you can all just take the time to vote there. I'm just going to give you a few seconds to fill in. There's only a few questions. There's 4 in total. So Salesforce being one, is that IaaS, software as a service, platform as a service. If you just check which each one they are, hopefully you can all see this. I can see I've got a few answers there, which is which is very good. And there's no necessarily right or wrong answers here. It's just understanding how people interpret these different things available in the cloud. Okay, good. So we got 4 or 5 votes there. Thank you for doing that, guys. I'm just going to leave that on for a full minute, and then I will end the poll. These results will actually be very useful for me. We've got 5 votes so far. So if you're still going to vote, you've got 3 seconds, 2, 1, and I'm going to end polling. Cool, some interesting results there. Again, you know, there's no sort of right or wrong answers. It's down to your interpretation. Looking at these results here, there's nothing nothing controversial in what people have chosen. It all makes sense to me, but that's very good. Thank you for doing that for me. I'm just going to close that down. So some people in the audience have got a requirement to go cloud quite soon, within the next sort of 5 years. If you're Imran, and Nico's going very quickly as well. I think one of the considerations you need to make, or one of the decisions you need to make really early, is what cloud provider or clouds you're going to use. Okay, so what this slide is intended to do is just to give you some positioning on the current state of the market. Amazon and AWS were first to market probably 12, 15 years ago, and they took a huge market share early on. Microsoft and their Azure offering, which has been around for over 10 years now, they have made a lot of investment in recent years, much of that since their current chief executive took charge to improve and catch up on their cloud offering. There are a lot of other traditional suppliers that offer cloud services, things like SAP and Oracle, and there are some new people like Workday who supply ERP and CRM systems too. So this slide is just showing you people who are planning to use AWS and Azure and Google. And for the guys that have got a cloud first strategy, have you made a decision around your cloud provider yet? That would be interesting to know that in the comments as well. If you can share that with us, that would be really useful. And I'm guessing it's going to be Azure or AWS from the people in the call, and I'm guessing I can probably guess at Azure, but it would just be good to know if anyone's going to do anything different. Cool. Thank you, Carl. So we've seen the market share. AWS took a big lead. Google and Microsoft have been catching up. If we look at the market share and what it's likely to be going forward, AWS has still got the largest market share, but it is dropping comparing to, say, Azure and Google as they're making efforts to catch up. Okay, so being first to market means AWS is still probably the most popular cloud in use in production environments, and it's likely to be for some time to come. Now, that said, the area I work with a lot of Microsoft organizations, people who use Microsoft extensively, and Azure does seem very popular with those guys, as it gives them an easy route for those organizations to move to the cloud. So from the customers I see a lot of, Azure is probably the main flavor, but I have done a bit of work with AWS, and my background being in SQL Server, a lot of SQL Server migrations to AWS too. Now, you should, if you're picking some of these options, you should get some benefits. Okay, so if you use them properly, these cloud options should mean your organization gets some benefits. So for example, if you're using infrastructure as a service, you're running your virtual machines in the cloud, you should get flexibility. Okay, so you've got your virtual machines and other virtual hardware and virtual infrastructure in the cloud. It gives you, infrastructure as a service gives you the most flexible cloud service, as you've got control to configure and manage that virtual hardware that's running your applications and providing you services. But it does leave you with a considerable amount of work to do managing the cloud infrastructure. We'll talk more on that later on. For example, if you've got a virtual machine with an operating system, responsibility for patching still falls to you, as it's your virtual machine. And if you've got, say, example, a database running on there, patching, that's going to fall to you too. Now, with platform as a service, what you should get is productivity. You don't need to focus on managing that virtual infrastructure as much. Your users can focus on managing the application and data development. Okay, everything from a platform perspective is handled by the cloud provider. So if you're working in distributed teams, it can make that easier. The platform is accessed over the internet and it can be made globally available. And an example of this would be I did some work for an asset management company that provides services to Asda, and they were expanding and diversifying into the US-based market. They had a team of developers in the US, and they had a team of developers up in Glasgow, and they were working on Azure SQL database as their back end. So it made that much easier to sort of manage and coordinate. And then if you're using software as a service, you'll get a pay-as-you-go pricing model. You pay for the software they use on a subscription model, typically monthly or yearly, regardless of how much they use the software, but you can increase and decrease the number of users as per your subscription as time goes on. Now, when it comes to implementing cloud in your organization, for those you're going through or have got a strategy in place to move to the cloud, cloud is now mainstream. Okay, so it's mainstream to get the traditional IT functions as a service, because businesses and organizations, they don't want the overhead, they don't want the burden of managing large IT teams or the responsibility and risk involved in hosting data centers in their own offices and buildings. It can be quicker and faster to get services from the cloud to bring these deliveries to bear. Okay, now technology services in the cloud can be scaled up or down quickly, on demand, even automatically. So you only pay for the resources you are consuming. You can scale things up very quickly, but you can scale things back too. Okay, key cloud suppliers such as Amazon and Microsoft and Google are pricing cloud services keenly. They are encouraging you to move to the cloud. So licensing models offered by Microsoft, they're making it more expensive actually not to move to a cloud source model. And some suppliers in certain areas are stopping the development of traditional solutions and are only providing cloud-based options. Now, I've got some examples where that's actually regressed as well. Looking at Power BI, that was a cloud first. That was a cloud-only offering, and then people didn't really take it up because they didn't want to go to the cloud, so they ended up with an on-premises version. So it does give the supplier some flexibility in that area, but generally speaking, there are only cloud solutions available for a lot of products these days. Now, the perceived benefits, and they should really be realized benefits as well, but the perceived benefits of cloud can lead to a lot of businesses to adopt a strategic principle or an architecture principle of a cloud-first approach. And we've seen that with the feedback we've got from a couple of the guys in the chat here today. Now, an example of this is the UK government. They adopted a cloud-first strategy way back in 2013, which basically means when you're making business decisions around IT, applications and infrastructure, you must consider if an appropriate solution can be implemented on the cloud first. Okay, but is moving to the cloud the right strategy to take? Does it mean everything has got to be in the cloud? Are there valid reasons not to push everything to the cloud? So whilst cloud solutions might be easier to consume, there's a strong argument that the complexity of ensuring all your data, all your service level agreements, all your connectivity, they're all aligned up, okay, in which you're going to need expert knowledge, and it can possibly be even more complex and complicated than traditional on-premises infrastructure. Now, providers such as Microsoft, Google, Amazon, they're very, very large businesses. They get economies of scale. Okay, they can pass those economies of scale on to their end users. Okay, now an example here is storage costs. They've decreased significantly over the last 10 years or so, due in part to these cloud providers' ability to purchase large amounts of storage at significant discounts, and they can then pass that on to their customers, okay, in the form of lower prices. So in theory, these cloud providers should be able to acquire hardware at a lower cost, or should be able to acquire hardware or virtual infrastructure from a cloud provider at a lower cost of a single user or smaller business who are purchasing it themselves. But there are limitations around economies of scale. a product will inevitably have an underlying core cost as it becomes more of a commodity, okay? And that is going to be based on what it costs to produce. And then this competition is another factor which also has effect on the cost of cloud services. So there are some limitations to economies of scale. Now, if you're thinking about going cloud, you're going to change how you invest in your IT. You might move from a capital expenditure model to an operational expenditure model. CapEx, or capital expenditure, the spend is up front. You deduct the expense from your tax bill. You have high upfront costs. You've got the value of investment then reduces over time. So, for example, you build a data center, you kit it out with the latest and greatest servers and racks. You plumb it all into the network, you get a big fat internet connection coming into it, and that costs you £5 million up front or whatever that might be. Okay, and you can then recoup those costs over time. With the cloud type model, you kind of pay as you go in, so it's more operational expenditure. You spend as you consume resources. Okay, you're going to get billed immediately, so you can deduct the expense of using that from your tax bill in that same year. There's no upfront cost. You pay as you use. So you don't need to find that $5 million to build that infrastructure up front, which again gives organizations that degree of flexibility. Speed to market. Organizations can sign up for a service from a cloud provider and get up and running almost instantly. So they can begin selling and providing their services to customers more quickly without the need for those significant upfront costs. If your service is busy, you consume a lot of resources in a month, then you're likely to receive a large bill. If those services are minimal and you don't use those services, then you're likely to receive a smaller bill. And there's a little bit around control and exit strategy, which we'll move on to and talk to in just a bit. So to take these benefits a little bit further, it's pretty well accepted that what I've just talked about are obvious benefits of the cloud. Innovative use of technology, it should drive business growth and should drive business efficiency. But these innovations, they can be opportunistic and a little bit entrepreneurial in nature. So requiring you to have the ability to react fairly quickly to try something out without huge levels of investment, okay? Or long time delays while you implement the infrastructure, to assess whether the opportunity is going to give you a beneficial outcome. So the traditional capital expenditure approach, we're investing up front and putting all this in yourself, they can be quite long to days. So that traditional infrastructure hosting model that is not necessarily conducive to that sort of incubator-based piloting approach. Okay, very few organizations that have traditionally used this approach have got spare infrastructure available for this type of R&D, which again can lead to delays, cost, complexity in trying out these new opportunities. So in effect, it's kind of stifling innovation. Utilizing cloud can potentially help remedy that challenge. But there are risks. Okay. Are there any risks? Well, there probably are some. I'll just take a sip of water because it's quite a big slide and quite an important slide that you probably want to be aware of some of the things I'm going to call out in here. There are perceived benefits of the cloud that people get sold on a cloud solution, but they're not actually getting a benefit. So an example I've seen in real life is if we migrate everything to Azure, we're not going to need a DBA anymore. The data platform's going to look after itself. And so, okay, great, well, that's going to save us some money. Now, that didn't actually turn out to be true, and getting the on-premises application and infrastructure into the cloud was a little bit more tricky than they thought, where you actually needed the skills of the DBA in order to do it. So there are some perceived benefits there. We'll no longer need our data center being another one. It's a great example. Oh yeah, we can get rid of our data center. We don't need it. But the problem you've got is you engage with a cloud provider and you start putting applications in the cloud, but you still need to run your on-premises and legacy applications until they're either migrated to the cloud or they've been retired. So you end up paying for your data center and paying for your cloud all at the same time. And nobody seems to factor in, or those potential overlaps can sometimes be missed out. And if you don't manage your cloud resources carefully, costs can quickly spiral out of control. Now, this talk is called Vampires, Vultures, Myths and Mysteries. Okay, and what I'm talking about here is vampire resources. So these are cloud resources you've created, but they're no longer used. Examples being over-provisioned virtual machines. You're never using the full capacity of the VM, yet you're paying for it. Orphan disks, load balancers, and whatever else you create and then forget about. And there's going to be many. So you've got these cloud vampire resources costing you money. They're difficult to find. It's not in Amazon's or Microsoft's best interest to let you identify these things, because they're going to end up spending less for them. But there's no sort of default reports that help you identify what I'm going to call these vampire resources. So there's a list of resources here you're going to want to consider as vampire resources and bring them into the light to keep your costs down. Underutilized virtual machines being one. Okay, your third-party supplier said, oh, we need a VM with this X capacity, but actually they were wrong in telling you that you didn't need that at all. So you end up paying for stuff that you're not using. Okay, and even a minimal amount of VM capacity means you get billed the full amount per hour. Okay, so you can either downsize that VM or maybe consolidate that workload into a different VM. Unused virtual machines. All right, so Andrew in accounts needed a machine a year ago. He's never used it. Or it might be your IT department, shadow IT, let's call it that, employees spinning up virtual machines for their personal sandboxes. When these VMs are powered off, you still end up paying for the storage and the virtual machine disks when they're idle. Orphan disks, you go away and delete the VM, but it doesn't delete the virtual machine disks. They remain. This is by design in case the VM is removed by accident. Okay, so you're still paying for the storage for those disks, even though there's zero chance of them being used. Moving data in and out of the cloud. Now, the cloud's a bit like England and Wales and the old Severn Bridge when it had a toll on it. Okay, it was free to get out of Wales, but you had to pay to come back in. Okay, so your applications and systems should only really pull data from the cloud when necessary, because bringing that data from England into Wales costs money. Okay, so too many API calls are likely to lead to a bump in your monthly bill. Now, services like Azure, they've got geo-replication. Okay, they have automatic high availability and disaster recovery. There is a charge for those. You get billed for it. Okay, do you need them for every system? Probably not. So make sure you've designed and architected your system in the cloud that it's only using the features it needs to use. So if it doesn't need HA and DR, then don't turn on those options. Load balancing. It's another HA feature. Sounds great. And developer Dave, he kind of wanted one, but he's not really using it, and he doesn't really need to use it, so it's costing money. So again, it just comes back to you only using what you need. Snapshots. I've encountered this problem on premises and the cloud. They're a great way to roll back your VM if an update goes wrong. Okay, but the longer you keep those snapshots, the more trouble they cause you. And in the cloud, it basically leads to extra overhead that's going to end up costing you money. We've got things like IP addresses as well. So when you're transitioning to the cloud, your traditional methods for monitoring for outages and performance are not enough. You need to track your resource usage as well as what you're using from the cloud service. Okay. Now, an easy way of finding these resources, these vampire resources, if they've got a non-zero fixed cost, so you're paying for storages and licenses, but there's an unknown or zero usage-based cost. Okay. So if you're on a storage account, you're billed for the data, but not the I/O. You might be able to remove the account, for example. And then in Azure, it's a lot of account storage that is created automatically by other resources, like when you create a load balancer, and they stay even when the original resource is removed. So you need to go and tidy that up too. Not all systems were designed to be designed to run in the cloud, and trying to force them into the cloud just won't fit. Okay, you are going to become reliant on your internet connection. How you budget for your IT resources needs to change. So moving from the CapEx to the operational expenditure model. Have your staff got the skills? Because if you've not moved to the cloud before, whilst the technology is similar and based on stuff they're going to be familiar with, there is a new way of working. when you look at sort of performance monitoring that we talked about there. Are there any regulations that you need to comply with to start moving to the cloud? So until reasonably recently, I used to do a lot of work for insurance companies. They were a little bit reluctant to move to the cloud because of they needed to know exactly where the data was going to sit, and it's the same for things like the NHS. And also, you can lose a little bit of control when you move to the cloud. And I've got a couple of examples of this as well. A major financial services company, been in the news reasonably recently, but not for this. They had an old SQL Server 2008 R2 instance running in AWS, and they got given 8 weeks notice that at the end of May, SQL Server 2008 R2 is going to be turned off. So they had no control over moving from 2008 R2 to a newer version. They were just told that they had to do it. So they lost a little bit of control there. Again, comes back to risks. If that application couldn't be supported on a newer version, they'd have been a little bit stuck. And Brexit's probably worth mentioning here, not to be controversial and not trying to climb on the back of the mess that's gone on in London this week, but if Brexit does happen, there are lots of regulations that state, okay, your data needs to reside within the UK and the EU. I don't know how Brexit is going to affect those types of legislation, but one of Microsoft's main data centers is actually based in Dublin. So it's going to be in the EU and Britain's going to be outside of that. So, that will be quite interesting to see how that plays out. And there are outages to the cloud, even though it's got all this resilience built in, and the cloud providers spend huge amounts of money trying to make sure that their solutions are resilient. We've got a list of outages from 2018 here. It's not exhaustive, it's not intended to shock, but all technology fails, and even cloud providers can have outages and issues. And if you look at some of the reasons behind some of these outages, you could reasonably be expected to have got some of these with your own sort of on-premises deployments too. Okay, so the key point here is even with all the investment these giants can muster, poo happens. Issues can occur and they can impact on your services, and you need to be prepared for that. Now, granted, I know that they are investing in minimizing these outages as much as possible. So, for example, this week, Azure SQL Database, they've actually come up with a hot patching for Azure SQL Database, so they can now patch your Azure SQL Database server with no downtime whatsoever. A concept called hot patching. Azure SQL Database is evergreen, which means it's always on the latest and greatest patch version of SQL Server, and they can now patch that without any downtime. Up until now, even though the downtime was only maybe a second or a millisecond, there was still an outage while those services were being patched. Is the cloud a solution for all your IT worries? Should we just sack the IT department? Probably not. It can help. It's got many benefits if it's used properly. If you go to the cloud, can you sack your IT department? No. Your services won't get to the cloud by themselves. And when they get there, depending on the choices you make, there's going to be work for you to do too. Okay. So whilst, for example, the amount of infrastructure located in an existing data center or comms room is going to reduce, there is going to be a reliance on your network connectivity to the cloud hosted service. And that's going to be critical to your business. So your expenditure might not significantly reduce, it just might be redirected to a different technology area. A cloud-first approach, particularly for utilizing applications hosted by different suppliers, can increase the complexity of how services are integrated. So you need to have someone who can integrate these technologies within your business. Okay, so you're not going to be able to just get rid of your IT department. And I'll be honest with you, there must be some out there, but I haven't come across any organization that has moved their services to the cloud and had a mass layoff of IT staff. That just hasn't happened. Okay. That said, they may require a slightly different skill set from the traditional IT functions too. So jobs may change, but I don't think there's going to be a mass exodus of IT staff either. And this brings us on to our next slide here. When you're using these public cloud services, we're comparing what you've got to look after on the different ones. So with on-premises, you have to look after everything from the sort of foundation architectures of networking, storage, servers, and then as we build up into sort of virtualization, operating systems, middleware, any runtime stuff, your data and your applications, you are responsible for all of that. If you consume infrastructure as a service, the cloud provider will take care of the networking, the sort of foundation stuff, storage, servers, and virtualization, but you are still responsible for the operating system, middleware, runtime, data, and applications. Platform as a service, the cloud provider takes care of most things, but you still need to look after your applications and your data. And with software as a service, the cloud provider takes care of everything, but you will still need to integrate that into your organization. Now, I like to use a bit of a pizza analogy here. Okay, with on-premises, let's say you want to make your own pizza. So you go out, you buy yourself a pizza oven, a flame grilled oven for the garden, you get all the baking trays, you install it, you supply it with gas, you buy the ingredients, you make the bread, you make the sauce, you buy the toppings, you shape the toppings for the pizza, you cook the pizza in the oven, you cut the pizza, you serve the pizza on your own plates, you provide your own knives and forks to consume the pizza, you clean the oven, you clean the dishes, and still your 10-year-old turns around and says they don't like pizza. Okay, so instead of going to all that investment, oh, well, I'll just try it as an IaaS. All right, so an IaaS pizza, you buy a pre-prepared pizza from the supermarket, you cook it in a conventional household oven. So you have to cook the pizza, cut the pizza, serve the pizza, clean the oven, clean the dishes, and your 10-year-old turns around to you and says, I don't like pizza. Now, platform as a service pizza, you get a pizza from Domino's or your favorite takeout, you serve the pizza then on your own plates, provide your own knives and forks and consume, and you have to clean the dishes afterwards, and your 10-year-old says, I don't like pizza. Pizza as a service, software as a service pizza, you go out to your favorite pizza restaurant, Pizza Express or whatever, you don't have to take care of anything, just need to order your pizza and make sure it fits in with your schedule. And even then, your 10-year-old can turn around to you and say, I don't like pizza, and he doesn't like the pizza that's being served. So hopefully that serves as a way of giving you a rough idea of what you're going to need to look after in terms of management responsibilities. Now, did I get, and I might have done, there might have just been a question comes through there, so if I've missed that, let me just see it. Geth likes pizza. Yeah, Geth does like pizza. So how do you get the best out of your cloud then? I'm just going to, a couple more slides here before we wrap up. You need to have the right governance in place. You need to make sure you're only using resources that you need. Okay, understand what you're going to need from your cloud provider. Understand how much that's going to cost, and if you're using it at full capacity, how much that is going to cost you, and understand what you are still going to be responsible for. Okay, so if you've got a managed IT service contract, for example, retender is due, the business is going to want to consider the skills required for the duration of the new contract term and whether they're likely to change. So in particular, expertise in the provision and migration of infrastructure services to the cloud, to a cloud solution should be paramount. It's likely that services will be increasingly sourced from third parties. Okay, so any managed service supplier is going to need to have a strong supplier management and commercial procurement expertise. And then the integration architecture and design skills are going to be vital too. You also need to consider exit and migration strategies. Can you move between suppliers? Well, you can. It's become a little bit easier, and I haven't done too many. So people have started with AWS and moved to Azure, or vice versa, although there have been a couple. Can I take my stuff and move it back on premises? Yes, you can, but taking data out is usually a cost to that. Other things to consider here, data sovereignty. So if you're in a regulated firm, you need to understand where your data is stored. And the cloud providers generally can't give you that, but you just need to be aware of where you're placing your data. Now, cloud providers make it really easy to consume services. In terms of exit terms and exit arrangement, though, you need to think about those. I'm not using Brexit as an example, but well, let's use it as an example. The exit strategy was never quite well defined or worked out, and I'll leave that there. So you want to make sure you can get access to your data when moving between suppliers if you can. And it can be a little bit difficult. Some providers, as I say, they charge you a lot of money for getting your data out. Okay, so that pretty much brings us to the end of the session. Okay, we've talked about cloud computing, what it is. We've talked about the options available to you and what they might mean to your business. We've spoken about some of the risks that you are mitigating by moving to the cloud, but some of the risks that remain afterwards. We've talked about what your responsibility is when you've moved your infrastructure and IT services to the cloud. Is it a solution for all your IT worries? Will you still need IT? It's a solution for IT problems. It can provide really good solutions. Will you still need IT? I suspect you will. And how to get the most out of the cloud, just only configure the resources you absolutely need. So thank you all for coming. If you've got any questions, please tap them in the chat pod or the Q&A pod. We will be running training in early November. We've got a one-day course all around Microsoft Azure fundamentals that we're going to be offering up. So if you're interested in coming to that, we'll probably send you an email and put some stuff on social media about that too. If you'd like to contact us, the contact details are on the screen there. So Twitter, LinkedIn, phone, email, however you like. And I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank Interpeople for sponsoring this event as well today. So thank you very much for coming. Any questions, please enter them in the chat. I'll be around for the next few minutes or so, but thank you all for coming.